Welcome to Who Are You, a CSI podcast. I am Lauren, and I've seen CSI through and through around 3 to 4 times.
And I'm Nick. This is my first time experiencing these episodes.
And today we are reviewing Season 2, Episode 13, Identity Crisis. Original air date, January 17th, 2002. Director is Kenneth Fink. Writers are Anthony E. Zeiker and Anne Donahue. And we open today's episode with rainy Vegas Strip, which is not a norm for the Vegas Strip, but it's a rainy Vegas Strip. So, Nick, what is our Vegas score for today's episode?
Our Vegas score, I didn't do the math. It is it is an 18, which is pretty low.
We are so befuddled this week, listeners. So apologize ahead of time. It has been a week for both of us this week. So
yeah, it's an 18.
All right. So not the lowest, but pretty close to the lowest.
It's pretty low. Yeah, there's there's inter episode scenes.
I was gonna say there's a few. I did notice, like now that I know that you rate them, I notice. I take note when there's we're using like a shot of Vegas to intercut between scenes. I take note of them now.
Yeah, I might have missed one, so
that's fine.
It could be
listeners. Tell us if we've miscalculated our Vegas score.
If I did, I definitely. Because I either missed one or I was really over generous with the seconds on the second one. So yeah, I think there was a third one.
Probably evens
but it's
out.
Super short, so it is at best a 20.
Okay,
I'm still sticking with 18.
Yeah,
it's not a perfect game.
No, I agree. So we then go to a man driving. He does the thing that listeners you should never do, which is pick up a hitchhiker. Don't pick up hitchhikers.
Probably should not pick up hitchhikers.
Don't just friendly advice. But he does. He's a kind and generous soul, and so he pulls over. He picks up a hitchhiker. We then see a collection of police at a warehouse. Catherine and Grissom are on scene. We learn that this is outside of their jurisdiction, but they've been called in because Grissom's name is on the tape. And we soon learn that the victim is a one Pete Walker. His birthday is August 17th, 57. They play the tape. We hear the recording that we've heard, the same script that we've heard on earlier episodes related to Paul Melander. Spoiler, this episode is all about Paul Melander. But the end of it is different in that he says, "Happy birthday, Mr. Grissom." And then, credits.
So they didn't really hone in on this, but I actually thought the warehouse was an homage to his prop warehouse and that he then disappeared from.
I think it is.
But they don't mention it in the show. They don't call it out.
They don't call it out, but I made the exact same assumption as you that this was the same warehouse that his Halloween prop shop used to be in.
Oh, no, it wasn't the same warehouse. But I think it was supposed to evoke this. Grissom standing alone in this giant empty
warehouse. Yeah.
Because I think the warehouse was in his district or whatever.
I mean, as we go through the episode, spoiler alert, we sort of learn that a lot of what Paul Melander is doing is writing a sort of twisted love letter to CSI. He's trying to tell them a story, and so I wouldn't be shocked that he very purposely picked this location because it is very similar to the warehouse where they almost captured him on the first go round.
Yeah.
But they did not.
Oh, also just to entice Grissom because he's enjoying this cat and mouse game.
Yes. Oh, 100% he is. Yes. And we'll see a lot more of that as we go through this episode. Sarah, Nick, and Warwick arrive on scene. They ask Grissom about his birthday because Catherine has clued him in that his birthday is the same birthday of the three victims. He has the same. Yeah. His birthday is August 17th, so they're all like, "Hey, man, what's up with that?" And he's like, "Don't worry about it. We can brush right on over it." Can we
talk about the fact that Gil has buried the lead of having the same birthday as these murder victims?
Yeah, he 100%.
Two unsolved murders.
Yeah, dude, come on. You knew Grissom. We know that Grissom dots his I and crosses his T's, and he's trying to act like he didn't know that his birthday was the exact same as the two previous victims. We're going to chalk this up to writing. not knowing that his birthday was
Yes.
the exact
They
same.
hadn't made that decision yet.
He hadn't made that decision yet, is what we're gonna go with.
I also feel like people would have like. There's no way Catherine didn't know when Grissom's birthday was. Because even if he wasn't gonna say it, it's probably in a file somewhere.
Yeah, but
she would have figured it out and given him cake once, and he would have been like, never do that again.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I also feel like Catherine's a sort that like she trusts you to give her pertinent information, and she's not gonna go like digging around behind your back to do it.
Yeah, but she's also like a caretaker for Grissom. You know what I mean?
No, I know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. So they break up the team to investigate. They kind of like, hey, Nick, you do this. Sarah Orko, you do this. Works outside. He ends up finding mud prints. There's only one set of prints, though, into the warehouse and out of the warehouse. There's only one set of prints. And they make the assumption that Paul Melander must have carried the body in because of like how much deeper these foot/boot prints are than like Warwick's,
which is
prints.
Kind of funny because they're like, there's one set in and one set out. Instead of comparing the in and out sets, we're going to compare Warwick's random scene contaminating boot print
to this one that happened hours earlier. So like weather conditions are different. So trying to compare them is like not a fair comparison. Yeah, it's a little murky, as they say.
It's the little TV magic for you, like this is the thing that's right here for us to look at.
Yes, exactly. Versus how a real investigation would probably go. We go back to Catherine and Grissom there with the body. They realize that they're stippling on the face, which we'll come back to pretty soon. And then Catherine finds a hair underneath the body, which surprises them because Paul Melander is usually like very careful about not leaving any like trace behind. So they're kind of curious that they find this hair underneath the body. Nick is in with the AV guy. He's letting Nick know that the recording, the tape was not recorded in the warehouse. Like it must have been recorded in like a car or a small SUV because of like the ambient or the like echo of the noise.
I love that like you can hear the windshield wiper during this whole conversation. And they're like, yes, it wasn't in the warehouse. Don't you hear the windshield wiper? Like maybe they thought the car was parked outside or something, but there's like, okay. And then like the next line is like, all right, let me take the wipers out. I was like,
yeah, okay, let me take the wipers out of this.
You do hear this windshield wiper nonstop.
Yes. They also hear a country song playing, which Nick is going to try to use to establish timeline because younger listeners, this was before you use like Apple Car or like Bluetooth to play your phone in your car. So if something was playing in the background, it was either a CD, a tape cassette, or the radio. So they're banking on this being the radio versus a CD or a tape.
You could almost tell it's the radio based on the sound quality. I know they're piercing it out, but like radio is an analog signal, has this sort of traditional, I mean, you might have like a satellite radio or HD radio in your car where it doesn't, but historically it's, going to be have a little bit of static to it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think it's like very telling the radio. And it's also true that like radio stations, like, there weren't a million of them, especially out here.
No.
And you just, they know what they played. You can just call them up.
Yep.
And find out when that song played. And they have like even
pretty
if it's not a chorus, you could probably find the exact moment it played.
Oh, I have later on in my notes in a little while, the exact like minute to minute that they played that song. So the radio station came through. Sarah and Warwick are then with Jim Brass. He's holding the sign that Paul Melander was holding when he was like hitchhiking. So he's like,
contaminating evidence again.
Yeah, of
no gloves, holding a sign.
No big deal.
That Paul Melander was holding.
But they found the victim's car. They found Pete Walker's car. And as they're kind of examining the car, the question of like, how did Paul Melander know this victim's birthday, right? Like this seems like a random attack. How could he have known that his birthday like fell on the anniversary of his dad's death? But we'll get there, listeners. We'll come back around to that. Grissom.
My prediction here is very wrong. Where
okay.
I was assuming, I didn't write it down, but I was assuming at this time, I was like, Oh, I just assume he hitchhikes, asks people when their birthdays.
Yeah,
he has a 1 in 365 chance of being right. And then I was like, oh wait, but it has to be the year too. I was like,
it's
oh.
the year too.
But like, what are the odds that someone stops to pick you up on the side of the road?
I know it's a little bit of suspension of disbelief has to be given in this episode for that one.
I thought for sure there's going to be a random scene somewhere where the wife of the deceased or a friend or someone was like, yeah, he used to pick up hitchhikers all the time.
Yeah, all the time.
It would cause him to be late or something. And then they'd be like, oh, okay. So if you knew when his birthday was and you knew he would pick up hitchhikers, then you had a good chance.
Yeah.
This I want to imagine all the other cars that stopped. And then he was like, oh, actually, no, I'm waiting for somebody.
Sorry, you're not the one. Keep going, please.
I'm going to keep standing here in the rain.
Yep. We're then with Grissom. He's with Doc Robbins. We learn that the victim died due to a single gunshot wound to the chest. And we have a little bit of a flashback as Grissom's kind of like looking at the stippling on the face of the good versus like evil head model that Paul Melander made in the earlier episode. And so Grissom takes this as a sign that Paul wants to show him both sides. Like he wants to show him both the good and the evil sides. And that's what he's supposed to take from this victim.
Spoiler alert, is almost a double meaning with the fact that he was living 2 lives.
Dun, dun, dun.
Well, I guess he was only really living 1 life, but he had a fake life that he sold CSI on before.
But I mean, I think he had 2 separate lives because his wife thought that he was out thrifting a bunch. And when he was in fact out thrifting was when he was like murdering and running this like Halloween warehouse and like doing all this stuff.
I assume that he never really ran a Halloween warehouse.
I think he did
because no one ever fact checked him on his number of sales.
I think he did in the sense that we find out that his father did the exact same thing. And he was That's true. Trying to emulate his father.
Or just kept the business going.
And keep the business going, yeah. So we're then with Sarah and Warwick. They're examining the victim's car. They find GSR. They realize that the bullet like went out the window. The bullet's not in the car. And they also figure out that the on the recorder is the window going down. Because Nick, when he's talking to the AV guy, is like, hey, what's that sound? And he's like, oh, I'm not quite sure. I'll try to figure it out. And they find out that the the window going down.
I was kind of impressed. This car looks pretty old.
It does look older.
And it has automatic windows.
Yeah, I know. This is, again, younger listeners, pretty impressive for 20 years ago. Like, my first car did not have power windows. My car that I bought in 04, 03, 04.
Around this time.
Had manual windows. You had to crank those babies down. I loved that car, though. Oh, I loved it. That car was great.
Thank God they have automatic windows in all cars before somebody figured out they should charge like a monthly subscription to use automatic windows. Yes,
charge you for it. For sure.
Could you imagine cars today? Like you have to pay for heated seats that are installed in your car.
I will say, not a paid advertisement, my friends, but Hyundai, if you want to pay us, we're open to it. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm for a paid advertisement, but I have a Hyundai Elantra hybrid, and the base model comes with heated seats.
Nice. I want a Hyundai Ioniq.
It's pretty sweet. So Hyundai, if you want to, just say it if you want to throw some money our way. I just paid it off too. I just paid off my car. Nice.
Is that why you're shopping for another car?
No, I'm trying to not shop for another car. I'm trying to not to. I'm just getting distracted by very fast cars that I
shiny things.
I just want to. But my plan would be to have 2 cars, which feels overindulgent. I don't want to replace my car. I love my car, and it's a hybrid, and it gets good gas mileage. So I don't want to get rid of my car and get a gas guzzler. I just want to have a gas guzzler when I occasionally want to drive a fun car, and otherwise drive my normal car.
Someone who hasn't had a car payment in 7 years.
I've always had a car payment. I've never not had. I literally just paid off my car. This will be the first time in my adult life that I haven't had a car payment.
Yeah, enjoy that. You want that for a while. I'm not looking forward to having to start paying for a car.
Yeah, to start paying for it again.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. I paid off my car early, and then it's been 10 years since I bought it. So,
but again, if you want to sponsor us, Hyundai, Just saying. But we go to Grissom and Catherine. They're with Greg Sanders. We learned that the hair planted at the scene is female hair, but the tag cell, so the kind of the end of the hair, is aged. So they're pretty sure that the hair has been planted. Like, this isn't like a freshly plucked hair. This is an aged hair. And so this is where they start wondering if Paul Melander has killed at least one woman. We'll come back around to this. This is a problematic episode. Oh, yeah. Listeners, let's just point that out now. Your non-binary trans host is going to tell you this is a problematic episode. But we go to Nick. He's in the car. Greg Sanders kind of unintentionally sneaks up on him, scares him a little bit. And we have a short scene where a number has been burned into the plastic of the car. And so Nick is like, this must have happened during the summer when the temperatures was really hot. We come back around to it pretty soon. The team has a powwow. There's a lot of muted talking. It's muted for a little bit. But then we do learn, as we discussed a little while ago, that the song was played on one station from 1:47 to 1:51 a.m. So they have a time for when the recording was made. Then Grissom makes the fairly shocking admittance that none of this matters. Evidence doesn't matter. Throw it out the window. Who cares? What are we even doing here?
I wrote down that technically that's true because they already know who the murderer is.
Yes, they know who he is.
Like they don't have to solve the crime. The crime has been solved. They're just trying to track down the killer, which is actually usually not their job. That's the job of the police force.
Yeah. So speaking of the police force, Jim Brass comes in. We learn that the victim drives the same route all the time. He drives reels, movie reels for this company. Same route all the time. And so that's where they're like, oh, Paul Melander must have figured that out. But how did he figure that out? Oh, that number burned into the car was a speeding ticket. Oh, his birthday is displayed on said speeding ticket. Oh, all the victims were pulled over by the same police officer. So then we go to Grissom and Catherine approaching said police officer Yarnell, who is our spot the guest star for this episode. This is Neil Flynn, who both Nick and I know as the janitor from Scrubs.
Hopefully, at least some number of our listeners also know as the janitor from Scrubs. Probably,
I would think the majority
one of my favorite shows.
I feel like there's a pretty solid crossover between these two shows, so I feel that a decent. I mean, he was in Mean Girls, he was in Magnolia, he was in The Fugitive. He's been in a decent amount of things, but both Nick and I immediately were like, oh, it's the janitor from Scrubs. So this is Neil Flynn. And so they talked to Neil for a little while, and he's advocating that he's, an up and up cop, and he just lives to serve and protect, and he even goes to court on his days off.
They really take his word for it.
They really do, because he immediately is like, yeah, there's 3 traffic judges, go talk to them. And they're like, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to stop questioning you, sir. And they just walk off. So we're in the courtroom. A judge enters, and crazy enough, Judge Mason is one Paul Melander.
Well, he's the spitting image of Paul Melander.
Yes. Grissom, flabbergasted. I wrote in my notes, absolutely flabbergasted. He approaches the bailiff / officer and is like, hey, we need to arrest this guy. He is wanted for murder, blah, 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 blah. They end up taking in Grissom in contempt of court instead. And then when Catherine tries to leave after Grissom has been taken in contempt, Melander's like, you have to stay here until the end of my traffic.
Yeah, you can't leave and go to the bathroom or anything like that.
Right, who do you think you are? You're acting like you're...
Oh, he's the judge.
Yeah, but I know he's acting like he's the judge, but you're the judge of small traffic court. This isn't the O.J. Simpson trial here.
I think the idea is you can't have her leaving, calling somebody.
Yeah.
He's trying to maintain control of the situation.
Yeah. So then we have Paul Melander / Judge Mason approaching Grissom's cell. He's trying to tell Grissom, hey, I'm not who you think I am. He even invites Grissom to dinner. He ends up walking away. Catherine arrives. They fume the bars because Judge Mason / Paul Melander put his hand around the bars. Then we
and
go
on
to...
the business card he handed him.
Yeah, that was the other thing. He handed him a business card.
There are plenty of places to get fingerprints from.
They chose the bars. They chose fumigating the bars versus just getting it from... Which is funny, because then later on they lift a print from a card.
Yep.
Yeah, good point. Okay. Sarah then approaches Greg Sanders. They find testosterone in the hair. They're very confused about this. This was definitely a point in the episode where I was like, wow, this is a dated episode. That they're like, why would there be testosterone like associated with a female hair? And I'm like, I know so many people on testosterone. Like, I know so many people on testosterone that I was like, what do you mean? Why would... And then I was like, oh, right, this was like 20 plus years ago, before this was like a fairly well-known treatment. So
something that people talked about or accepted.
Yeah,
as well.
This was like definitely really probably not talked about at the time.
There is a tenor to Sarah's voice in a line later on, and I cannot wait to talk about it.
Oh, sweet. Great. Okay. Then Grissom goes to Judge Mason / Paul Melander's house, but he has a police officer drop him off.
Well, he doesn't have a car. Sarah,
I just found it very weird. But so the police, they drop him off. The wife answers the door. She seems like a lovely lady. Nothing against her. We learn
the boots.
Yes, he's like very interested in the boots that are outside.
Because he doesn't use gloves, again, while touching evidence.
Yep. No. We learn that the couple adopted a son, Craig, in 92. Then they all like sit down for dinner. Craig snaps a picture of Grissom. We have a short scene of Catherine at a computer running fingerprints. She gets a match. Then Grissom gets a call from Catherine. Crazy enough, Paul Melander's prints match Judge Mason prints. So it's like Judge Mason to Judge Mason prints here. Like, what is going on? This transitions us to a Grissom and Catherine walk and talk. Crazy enough, the records that like would have held Paul Melander / Judge Mason's birth records burned down. So like, there's no birth certificate, like no record there. But
this is where the crazy starts in my notes.
Oh, okay. There is some crazy in this episode. This episode takes a lot of suspension of disbelief, I think.
At this point, I wrote, son is adopted. There's no birth certificate, and they have hair with testosterone in it. I wrote, is Paul Melander female?
Bum, bum, bum.
Which I guess in itself, technically Paul Melander isn't female if Paul Melander chooses to be male.
Right.
But I was like, is Paul Melander born female? Like, that was the thread I was following.
Like, was Paul Melander AFAB? Like,
yeah,
assigned female at birth, which we do learn in a little bit more detail.
I later think I'm wrong. And we'll get to that when we get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. Because that's, I feel, an interesting take in this episode. So part of this research, though, they do find like tax records for a Paul and Isabel Melander. So this brings us to Grissom and Catherine arriving at a home.
I thought he was going to have a second wife.
Oh, that would be amazing. So we go to Grissom and Catherine arriving at a home. Isabel answers, and she admits, and this is especially funny. I shouldn't say funny, but like, I was like, oh, episode, you did a good job of this. The second watch through, every reference that she makes to Paul in this is a gender neutral way.
Most importantly,
she goes, my child did this. My child did that. Not like my son, my daughter. It's very gender. Like, my child did this. So she says, like, my child, testified and, did
Catherine
everything that
says
they
your
could.
Child.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, she, like, sets it up, and then she says it again. And they're so distinct with it. At this point, I was convinced I was correct. Which is crazy, because in a second, I'm going to be convinced that I was wrong.
Yeah, you're like, what's going on here?
This is the roller coaster of the first watch through. It was like, I was like, oh, I figured this thing out. And then they just totally make me convinced that I was wrong.
Yeah.
I can't get over it.
We find out that Paul is in fact her husband, and Catherine pretends that she needs to go to the bathroom. Instead, she's just meandering around the house. She ends up finding a girl's room. While this is going on, Isabel is showing a ashtray to Grissom that was made from like a handprint of her husband. Grissom sees green coloration. He's like, oh, hey, we can test this back at the lab. She agrees to like let them test it. Catherine steals baseball cards. She just like pockets baseball cards from the girl's dresser.
They're probably worth a lot of money. It's a 20-year-old rookie card. Who knows? Yeah. Could be a Derek Jeter in there or something.
Yeah. Isabel ends up finding Catherine in the room, and she lets them both know that Pauline, quote unquote, died a long time ago.
So
we'll
I literally was like, at this point, I was like, oh, never mind. I'm wrong. He must have killed his sister when they were young. And then they say it out loud a second later. And I'm like, okay, yep, nope. That whole other idea was just completely off base. Let me cross it out in my notes.
We then have Grissom and Catherine. They're outside of the home. As Nick just said, they talk about how Paul must have killed his sister. Grissom is then with Greg Sanders. The green substance is this like old school substance that people used to make to like use to make molds. And this is where Grissom realizes that the fingerprints that they have been pulling from all the other crime scenes and from the hand mold are actually original Paul Melander's and not son Paul Melander's. So he's been planting his father's fingerprints at the crime scenes, not his own fingerprints. Grissom then walks into where Catherine is. She's running the print from the card, and then, crazy enough, the print from the card matches Judge Mason. So they're like, okay, see, this proves that, like, Paul Melander is Judge Mason. Greg Sanders beeps them, so they go back in. We then have a moment with Greg, Catherine, and Sarah with Greg Sanders. This is where we learn that he planted his own hair. Paul, in fact, is Pauline Melander.
They don't...
In a sense.
They don't actually know this yet because they just know that the hair matches the hair from the bedroom, right?
Yes.
So they're very strongly convinced. But I was actually, at this point, I was like, that doesn't mean anything. It could still be Pauline's hair.
That
he's held on to for years.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take too long to
No, we
circle.
don't. So then Grissom is back with Isabel. And this is where Isabel lets him know that Pauline returned a very strange man. Like, Pauline went someplace, came back a very strange man. And
that's true. Pauline came back a murderer, killed a whole bunch of people.
Yeah. This was, and we'll get into it, I think. But Grissom also asked if they can collect further, because they collected hair from the scene, but they didn't have any sort of right to take hair, so they couldn't use it in court. So then Grissom is like, hey, can we legally take hair so that we can use it in a court of law? And we have to assume that Isabel says yes to this because they end up running this hair.
Hey, isn't there like a whole thing where you can spoil the fruit where like you took hair illegally, tested it, and that made you want to collect hair, like even though you didn't get a warrant for it?
Yeah, I think there is. I do. I feel like that is. I do feel like that is a thing that like you can be like, oh hey, you. Yeah, it's like it's fruit from the poison tree.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
and the point is to prevent you from doing illegal things to get to help you figure out what it is, just so that you can find an excuse to do it legally. Right.
Yeah. So then we're with Grissom. He's with Paul Melander, and they have like a pretty intense conversation where we learn that growing up. So basically, and I will say this as like not an expert on this situation, but it sounds like from what little information we get from the show here, from Paul Melander here, that Paul is probably what we would say falls under intersex.
Yeah, that's the impression that I got.
Yeah,
like, this isn't really have a way to talk about it.
Yeah, this isn't quite. And again, I am non-binary, but I'm not intersex. This isn't quite like, oh, everything from like hormones and chromosomes say that I'm a woman, but I identify as being a male. This is like, yeah, my chromosomes say that I'm XX, but maybe like hormone levels that they detected when they were a child says maybe they're not. And so basically the doctors told his parents, raise him whatever gender you want to, which then led to a very complex childhood where Pauline was a girl when she was inside the house, but was treated as a boy outside of the house because her mom wanted a girl and her dad wanted a boy. So there's a very weird socialization. Like there was like not clear boundaries.
I also like they don't really get into the details, right?
So no, they don't. We have like we're basing this off what like little we have on what's given in this episode.
You hit the important part, which is that, you know, Paul Melander represents themselves as, you know, being treated two genders growing up, and it all kind of changes when his dad dies.
Yeah, so his dad dies, and this is kind of what triggers the switch in him, because in his mind, if he had been a boy, like through and through, he could have saved his father. Like that was like his defining moment in his kind of gender identity journey, was like he witnessed his dad being murdered, and in his mind he was like, if I was a boy, if I was more masculine, then I could have saved his father, which Grissom fairly is like, no you couldn't. Like it does not matter. Like it does not matter if you were a boy or girl in that situation. Like you did what you could, you testified in court, but like it doesn't matter if you were a boy or a girl, you wouldn't have been able to stop what happened. But that was a very defining moment in Paul Melander's life. And so he went in, ended up years down the road getting sexual reassignment surgery. Grissom he presents a warrant for his DNA. And then he lets Paul Melander swipe his own cheek for DNA. There's no way that would have held up in a court of law. Like, you have to take that swab. What are you doing? Like, what is happening here?
We don't need chain of evidence.
Oh my gosh.
Paul Melander is basically a trained CSI.
I was literally just watching a Grey's Anatomy episode. Judge me all you want, listeners. But there was a whole thing about chain of evidence. And Meredith Grey had to carry around a cooler with a severed penis in it for like the entire episode because of chain of evidence. Like literally couldn't let this cooler that had a severed penis inside of it away from her until the police could sign it out because of chain of evidence reasons.
This is a medical show, right?
It is a medical show.
Okay.
And
I would have got away with it too if it wasn't for that lady who's carrying around my penis the whole time.
Then he kind of like walks out. But I have to say, good job, Grissom. He does not dead name Paul Melander.
Nope.
As he's walking out, he refers to him as Paul Melander. He does not call him Pauline Melander. He calls him Paul Melander and like refers to him in like, male pronouns and such. So good for you, Grissom. Respecting the pronouns and not dead naming somebody.
Although I'm still not entirely sure they identify as Paul Melander as Mason, Judge
Mason. Yeah, I know. Yeah. But regardless, he doesn't try to infer that he's a woman or call him Pauline.
We missed the whole scene. I don't think it was weird, but they were talking about the hair and Paul Melander's gender. There's a line where they're like, yeah, but why would there be testosterone? And
yes, why would there be testosterone?
And the way Sarah says sex change is so like accusatory, almost like.
Again,
like,
this is very...
like he's the kind of person who would have a sex change.
A sex change. This is very telling of the times. This is very like, wow, this is not happening now.
And I was like, wow, you just wear your heart on your sleeve there in terms of how you really feel about it, I guess.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, but I was like, that's like, you got to spell it out for the audience, I guess, but you don't have to say it like that.
I know. I'm like, come on, Sarah, don't be so judgy. Grissom steps up to the plate, doesn't dead name, uses correct pronouns, so good for him. Grissom and Catherine are then back in court.
His mom doesn't dead name either, actually.
No, that is true. Like in
the second
it's not great in the sense that she kind of acts like Paul killed Pauline.
Yeah.
Like that's not a great way to look at gender reassignment by any stretch of the imagination. They're also trying to
throw me off the scent, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they're kind of doing it on purpose.
They are kind of doing it on purpose.
But later on, I was like, on the second watch through, I keyed up on that. I was like, oh yeah, she refers to her son as son and Paul.
Yep.
As, once she's talking about it.
Yep.
I was like,
in the current present day, she doesn't mix those up. So we go to Grissom and Catherine. They're back in court. We learn that Melander is going to be representing himself. Grissom then very shortly kind of storms out of the courtroom. He opens up a room. Melander's gone. Crazy. We just see his prison jumpsuit and his wristband.
Prison jumpsuit.
So then we go to Grissom and Jim Brass watching security footage. We see Paul Melander just doing the hey CSI piecing out thing.
I wanted him to do the stop full wave.
The stop full wave.
Yeah. I wanted it to be a direct mirror.
Yeah. Wasn't it quite a direct mirror? It was a bit of a throwback, but not quite the same thing. And this is where we learn that Paul probably had Grissom's ID because he carried Grissom's ID back to him in the prison, and then his son also like took his picture at the home and like made the little IDs and did that whole thing. Yeah. So
not that like you needed Grissom's picture to do that, because
no, you didn't look at it,
but it would be Paul's picture, or Mason, whatever, Mason's picture. And it not that like, I don't know, like you could basically just shown anything, like clearly, right? Because there's a photocopy.
Yeah, you don't look anything at all like him. Like they don't look anything at all alike.
The important thing was actually more like the son was making these IDs, right? They had like a badge holder and a thing, all these different things. You didn't need to photocopy Grissom's ID to switch it in. You could have just printed one out on your home computer.
Right. Yeah. So we then go to Grissom and Catherine, another walk and talk. And this is where we learn that the original victim, well, not the original, because that would have been Roy Harmon?
Harser? Something like
that. But the original victim from this episode, Pete Walker, his mom died in childbirth. So why in the recording would he be like, oh, I want to say sorry to my mom? And Grissom is like, Paul Melander does not make mistakes. There's something that like we're missing. And so he pieces out. We then go to Grissom back at Isabel's house. No backup. Just goes in totally on his lonesome. He does have a gun, though. He goes in with a gun. He finds Isabel, sadly, deceased at the kitchen table with like a hot steaming cup of tea in front of her, but with a knife stabbed into her gut. He then still does not call for backup. Doesn't do anything like that. Just continues searching the home.
Killing people through their stomachs.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he has a big stomach thing. And so Grissom continues searching the home, and he ends up finding Paul Melander dead in the bathtub of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And crazy enough, Paul Melander has left his own suicide note recording.
Yeah.
End of episode.
And his birth certificate.
He
also was born on the day that
his dad's dead. Yeah.
And his middle name is Paul.
Yeah. That's something like Pauline Paul?
Yeah, because they couldn't decide on the gender. So they probably Pauline Paul Melander is on the birth certificate. It does say sex female on the birth certificate. I paused it.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure why he killed his mom. He never really gave a reasonable reason, although he didn't have a good reason to kill the other 3 people. So
no, he didn't. So yeah. So Nick, what did you think about today's episode?
For all of its flaws, I like the episode. It was a nice little finish to it. I think there was maybe a few missed opportunities or something. I feel like there's a better version of this episode out there somewhere.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of worse versions of this episode out there. And I think the thing that is probably the least fulfilling is that I feel like the Paul Melander story could have kept going. I would have loved for it ended with him like abandoning his family, going somewhere else, and him just popping up another time. So
as I already told Nick, technically this is the end of Paul Melander, but not the end of the Paul Melander story.
Which I still don't know what that means, but
I'm not going to ruin it because it takes
no
a lot of seasons to come back.
Yeah, I was going to say
it's not it is not anytime soon that we come back to this. It is like quite a ways in the future that we come back to it. So I don't even remember when, but it is like much later in the show.
Pull from that well a long time from now.
Yeah. So just saying, it's not the end of it. But
yeah, I like the episode. It was fun. Yeah. It was fun to watch. It was fun to rewatch, sort of. It was a little like you kind of knew what was happening at every turn, so it's not the most rewatchable, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, I feel similar. Like it was not the best episode, pretty decent episode. I didn't mind watching it twice, which is, we've kind of talked about before, is a decent way of me rating episodes. Is like, is the second watch through so painful that I can like barely make it through is usually a sign that it's a horrible, horrible episode. And I didn't feel that watch. I was like, oh yeah, all right. Like, again, there was even like a few things on the second watch through. I was like, oh yeah, like they did a good job there of like not using any gendered words when referring to Paul Melander as a child, and things that I might have missed on the first watch through. So yeah, similar. I feel like they wrapped this storyline up probably sooner than they had to. Like, I felt like this could have been, and I feel like more could have been made out of Grissom having that birthday. Like, why couldn't Grissom have like legitimately been a target and they had to do something to like save Grissom from becoming like a victim of Paul Melander. Like, it's just weird that they're like,
I thought
you should have been,
by the way, was going to have the birthday, not him.
Oh, okay.
I thought he was going to kill his mom.
And she was going to have the birthday.
And she was going to have the birthday. And then it would like continue, like there would just be more people or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There were a lot of different things you could have done. My guess is they wanted to wrap that story up. Maybe the actor was like, hey, listen, I'm not.
Yeah, I'm
not coming back next year.
Yeah. So if you want me, you're going to make it happen like now. Yeah. Who knows? But it is his last credit. He does not return as Paul Melander, but we'll see who does return in our next episode when we return next week for season 2, episode 14, The Finger.
Oh God. It's a lot of context. This episode is clearly about Greg Sanders.
It's not. But in the meantime, we're on Patreon if you would like to support us at Who Are You? A CSI Podcast. We're also on Facebook at Who Are You? A CSI Podcast. You can also find us on Twitter /X, Instagram, and Threads at Who Are You? CSI Pod, or email us at whoareyoucsipod@gmail.com. But otherwise, we will see you next week.
No spoilers.
No